Roughly 100,000 years during the rise of modern Homo sapiens, a ship would touch down on planet Earth in an area so remote our species wouldn't discover it until 1982. This ship, however, was not carrying visitors seeking out other planets to colonize or discover, but instead was seemingly taken over by an entity that not only did advanced forms of life have difficulty containing and ultimately failed to do, but would go on to ransack two camps in Antarctica, one belonging to Americans and the other belonging to a group of Norwegians. The Norwegians were the first to discover this creature and were quick to celebrate their finding. However, this creature would break out of its icy tomb to hunt down the people to secure its own survival. After the Norwegian base was destroyed, only two survivors would remain. A dog, or what was believed to be a dog, would flee, and the Norwegians would attempt to hunt the creature down, knowing that it was not actually anything from this planet. As it fled across the icy landscape, it happened across the American base. Here, the Norwegians, with the language barrier in place and the accidental wounding of an American member, would cause them both to be taken out before they were able to warn the other team of what was actually going on. This mistake would cost the American team most of their men and sled dogs. From here, the creature would once again be doing what it did to the other base in an effort to continue growing and thriving. Using much of the same techniques from the Norwegian base, flamethrowers would be resorted to, which were highly effective, but not before most of the members were converted or destroyed. So you're all caught up now in case you haven't seen the movies. This brief rundown would give you an idea of what we were dealing with and what ended up happening. First thing I would like to say is this is my first time discussing a movie versus a video game, so I'm kind of working with footage already captured, so bear with me. And I mean, I've been getting requests to discuss The Thing now for probably since like literally the first day of my channel, so let's give it a shot. So to start, where did The Thing come from? Based upon information obtained from the 2011 version and the opening scene from the 1982 version, along with what would be discovered at the end, I would have to presume that the aliens that arrived to Earth were in fact infected already, or were well on their way to becoming infected. The crashing into Earth would not suggest that the Thing originates from that tech level, but there is a contradiction that we will see later when it comes to the crash landing. However, even this can still be explained if we use time frames. The Thing is considered to be a supercellular parasite. In this sense, it's able to absorb the host much like any other parasite does and feeds off them. However, the Thing takes it one step further by perfectly mimicking the animal, no matter the species it seems. As it is able to mimic everything down to how the person would act, speak, and conduct themselves, this would make it exceedingly hard to root out the hiding until arguably it was too late. But the question remains then, how is it possible that it is able to do this? Well, supercells are not like normal cells. In fact, they are pretty much super comparatively. These cells in our own bodies would be the immune cells. Their specific task is to spread out and find cancer cells or cells infected with viruses and subsequently destroy those cells by inspiring apoptosis. However, the term supercell is colloquially used as it's not exactly a medical term in biology, or at least not really used in my neck of the woods. But think of a supercell as a cell that is able to do much more in terms of interaction with other cells than just signaling and communication. A supercell can typically induce a response in a cell, just like as mentioned previously with our immune system, or the supercell can take over a cell entirely as seen as a trait the Thing handily possesses. This idea is really not all that strange either. Every day our leukocytes engulf and destroy other cells that would enter our bodies. As we see when a blood sample is taken from one of the infected men from the Thing, his red blood cells are surrounded by more spiky looking cells. Upon contact with these spiky cells, the red blood cell is absorbed, broken down, and then the spiky cell forms into a red blood cell. This process is continued until the body is formed, or in some cases, looks like a congealed mass of god-awful stuff I would never want to touch. So let's discuss for a moment then how the body would become infected by this creature. It's clear from what we can see the cells doing that these spikes seemingly line the entire surface of the cell, all 360 degrees. In Earth's biology, things like viruses have a similar path of infection as they attach themselves to the surface of a cell to infect it. However, should a cell not present the correct cellular markers, then that cell cannot be infected. A major example of this, which a lot of people may not know, is the HIV virus. 1% of the Caucasian people are actually immune to HIV as they possess a homogeneous set of genes, and even then they can still be resistant to HIV if they possess a heterogeneous pair of these genes. The Delta 32 allele is what's responsible for this resistance. During the bubonic plague outbreak, a small population was able to survive and go on to breed after others were wiped out. This mutation in the Delta 32 allele made them more resilient. How this inadvertently had an effect on HIV was the presentation of the CCR5 protein complex on the surface of the cell. Instead of forming outside of the cell, which is what HIV initially uses to attach itself to, it is formed under the cellular membrane. Because of this, HIV was never able to get a hold on the cell and thusly was never able to infect it, which means it was not able to get a foothold settled in the body, which rendered the HIV virus completely ineffectual against the person. Looking at this example, something as terrible as HIV can be thwarted by something as simple as a different growing pattern of a protein complex. So then, how would this make something as alien as the Thing be able to bypass all cellular markers to infect a person? Well, I believe it all goes back to presentation of the supercell. The cell is surrounded by spikes, so rather than relying on the cell to present the opportunity to be infected, it pierces the cellular membrane and drags it in. Much like harpooning a whale, I guess. After doing this, it would lyse the cell and absorb the genetic information housed within the nucleus. With this information obtained, its cellular functions, which I must say are ridiculously faster than ours, can form the shape, correct cellular markers, and even may be able to carry on the same function as the cell if the creature saw fit to do so. But seeing as this is just a blood cell, let's talk about resistance as well. For instance, why doesn't your body mount any sort of effective strategy against it concerning your immune system? Well, firstly, let's discuss your immune system in general. What you hold within you is a thermonuclear answer to disease. If the immune system could be programmed to attack a certain ailment or disease, the process would be so effective it could virtually eradicate almost any invader. Ironically, this nuke also has the ability to wipe you out and your cells if improperly directed. But the issue is, we currently only have one way to effectively program it, but that science is still in its infancy. And even still, it's nothing like being able to attack actual alien biology. So let's start with the basics. White blood cells versus the Thing's supercell. Upon first being infected, your body would likely become aware of the presence of other cells in the body, but would quickly lose track of them. As we all know, the Thing's supercell is able to quickly and efficiently assimilate to whatever cell it has infected. Once the Thing has assimilated to your cell, your body's defenses would no longer be able to recognize it as not one of its own. Because of this, white blood cells are mostly useless. Should a white blood cell find the Thing cell before it assimilates into another cell, there's also no guarantee that during this process, the white blood cell attempting to engulf that supercell wouldn't then be assimilated in the process, or even the lysing material that the white blood cell uses could be entirely useless. However, by sheer probability, some white blood cells may be able to effectively destroy the Thing cell, but this would not be anywhere near enough and the infection would still be quite assured. Next thing we can discuss is the adaptive immune system. White blood cells are considered to be the innate immunity and they are sparked to action pretty quickly when a possible infection has happened, but they are unfocused and less effective. The adaptive immunity is much more focused. The biggest issue is for the adaptive immune system to be activated, you need genetic material from the invader, which comes from the cells being destroyed by the innate immune system, but you also need time. Considering the infection spreads so quickly from cell to cell in a person's body, it's virtually impossible for the adaptive immune system to be activated. This may be why the Thing must act so quickly, however, because arguably if your adaptive was activated, it may in theory be strong enough to overcome the disease. The reason for this is something called the cytokine storm. When your body is under attack from a disease, inside of you, you have something called B cells and T cells. By complete chance, these cells have random configurations of proteins they can release called antibodies. Should a Thing cell be destroyed, and what sort of cellular markers, if any it possesses, which I believe it does have those, are then presented to B cells and T cells, the body can learn about its attacker. The spikes, for instance, would be a huge downfall for the Thing, as these would be blunted and rounded. Anyhow, should a T cell or B cell be activated, they will multiply and begin releasing these antibodies in mass quantities throughout the bloodstream. When this happens, the antibodies will seek out the antibody, which is the Thing, and attach themselves. In theory, this could yield the Thing's main attack completely useless, its ability to latch onto cells and change them. It would be like putting a cork on each spike of a cactus. All of a sudden, it becomes a lot less dangerous to handle. At this point, should the lysing material work via white blood cells, which this whole idea is predicated on getting genetic information from the cell initially, so lysing would have to work, then the body could possibly overcome this disease. However, again, I have to say this is extremely unlikely to be activated in the time needed. We see when people are infected, they succumb in hours to minutes depending on what dose they were infected with and where it was. For instance, when one of the American team members is bitten by the dog on the leg, the dosage was small and as such took longer to spread throughout the body. However, with split face, the dosage was large and quite close to the brain. Because of this, the person was quickly taken out and added to the biomass of this creature. So this is just my general thinking on this, but actually there may be a way to beat the Thing, and it would all be based on antibodies of our body that could work against the Thing, and that would be by using a vaccine. If it were possible to extract gene information from the Thing, it could be used to develop a vaccine against it, assuming that the creature doesn't change from its original form of cells to something different. And I don't imagine it would, because it only changes with the addition of new genetic information. but likely its own genetic information would not be lost in the process. So the idea is like you have a car that can take you anywhere, but it won't move without the key. The car is the thing's cell, and it can turn into anything it wants, but the genetic coding of the prey cell is the key to kickstart this process. Regardless, a vaccine would be worth a try considering that it does have to interact with our cells to change it, so it must play by what can only be assumed to be general rules of not just our planet, but life as a whole, no matter the planet. Also, fairly ironically, any person with an autoimmune disease may fare better than those without, as the body is already attacking itself. So those who destroy the thing cell because it presents cellular markers the body is used to attacking may actually get that genetic information to continue the fight against the thing. But I would have to say the most interesting aspect of the thing isn't just the cellular war taking place in your body or the assimilation, but how it ultimately becomes you and can trick apex species on Earth and out in space into being too late to form an effective response. So let's get into not only the assimilation of your meat suit, but the replication of you as well. Consciousness, movement, rhythms of the body, breathing, it's all very complex things. As humans, we barely think about it because
it works. It just works.
But in reality, humans aren't even sure what consciousness is or why we have it. We could get into like a 20-page discussion on how the brain operates, so it's kind of a little bit of a rabbit hole, which I do have to tell you, recently there was a kid that had 90% of his brain gone, and they didn't know it as he grew up, and he suffered literally no mental impairments from it. But if adults have a stroke, it could permanently impair them. Again, what are humans and how does the brain work? Difficult to tell, but the physical process of it working and also the physical structures of it are very different ideas. We are quite aware of placement of certain pieces and how those interact to get something else. There is an idea that if you were to somehow take an exact snapshot of your brain, all attachments between neurons, electrical signals, chemicals, everything, you could create the consciousness of that person and then let it progress from there. It may be the same as the original snapshot, or it may turn out different. It just really depends on how it all comes together. Because of this consciousness that may be preserved, then your cells are what give rise to consciousness, along with all chemicals associated with it. But all right, we're treading way too far into consciousness. There's a lot of debate onto what it is, but from what I believe, configuration is key. When the thing's cells assimilate the red blood cell specifically, it seems random. They float around and just get to cells. But this is because it's also floating around in plasma. Take something like a muscle cell or a neuron that is stringently connected, and you have a whole different set of parameters. We see that when Splitface is infected, at first his face seems to be melting with the others, but after a few seconds when he yells, the creature also yells. This is because muscles are fusing together, which means that these cells are no longer just free floating, but anchored in place like any other cell needs to be. The unwilling participant in Splitface is also able to maintain a few seconds of consciousness, arguably because his skull provides a temporary barrier, but then again, this skull is quickly converted, which then would go on to the brain. Now, Splitface didn't really need to blend in. At this point, the creature had a lot of biomass and was fairly lethal to boot, but for when the thing needs to still blend in, it is imperative it becomes the person. And this goes back to the snapshot of the mind. When the cells are infected, specifically the neurons, the shape is assumed as well as the interior mechanisms, and the cell becomes the neuron. It would quickly link up back to its original configuration, not only to retain memories of the neural pathway, but also infect other neurons that were near it. As the infection spreads through the brain like wildfire, eventually the whole brain is converted with the same configurations adopted. The entire life of this person would likely be remembered by the thing as well. On top of that, learned information, an understanding of specifically human tactics, and the knowledge that outside of this frozen wasteland lies the rest of humanity in more biomass. It seems, however, that even while adopting a human's physical form, this is tenuous at best. Should the thing be discovered or injured, it will quickly drop the facade and choose a different form, usually hosting bony protrusions and razor-sharp whips, to kind of stave off their human attackers. And largely, this is effective. It is able to move faster than a human, is much more powerful and more lethal in the process. Because it is able to reconfigure the muscle, bones, and really anything from the physical form of the adopted body, this means that each individual cell still possesses its own genetic coding, and the prey's genes are not adopted into it. Instead, likely in the cell are mechanisms to read the DNA, much like our own cells, which in turn will develop specific shapes and patterns. but when the need arises, it can read its own genetic coding and change into what it wants. An interesting aspect of this is that the creature is certainly a carbon-based life form then, and this would also imply that the genetic constants such as guanine, adenine, thymine, cytosine, and concerning RNA, uracil, seem to be universal as this creature can interact and read these chemicals, but due to its changes, I would also hazard a guess as to say there are extra chemicals in its DNA backbone that may not be in ours. But this also explains why the alien spaceship, which I mentioned at the beginning, crashes in the beginning of the 1982 version of the Thing. The Thing was never of that technology level, but instead may have infected a creature upon the ship. When it did so, much like the human camp, slowly but surely it ran through the alien crew, until finally either by an alien's choice to strand the Thing on a desolate planet that ironically would have intelligent life later, but didn't really have intelligent life then, or maybe the pilot was infected and began succumbing to the Thing, crashing before the Thing had a chance to regain control of the ship, is really unknown. Should the Thing have intentionally crashed on Earth, then this would raise the question as to why it didn't pilot the ship more effectively into a better area, seeing as it was able to utilize Earth's vehicles with little difficulty, which we have seen. So this says to me it didn't have control of the ship, as if it did, it would also have a snapshot of the alien pilot's brain and would have probably gone on to continue to infect other worlds. All I know is we kind of got screwed in the process. Also, I did want to point out something that people may not have seen or really even noticed in the movie, or at least the 1982 version. Who is actually the Thing in 1982? Well, apart from everybody who got kind of bodied in the process. Well, have you ever noticed McCready is breathing out and you can see his breath, but Childs is breathing and you can't see his? Seems a little strange, doesn't it?